Good afternoon, and welcome to our latest in the Smarter Content series, Unlocking Valuable Content by Adding Semantic Knowledge. Today, we're joined by myself, Philip DeLorme, Senior Account Manager at Progress, Drew Wankowski, Principal Solutions Engineer at Progress, and finally, one of our customers, Canadian Press, Associate Director of Content and Operations, Paul Kelly. Just before we start with the main event, let me just sort of why are we here and what we're looking at. So, data is becoming more and more important, and it's becoming even more important to have data with context. And that applies to content as well. With the rise of generative AI, with more data-led decisioning and insights being required in business, it's key to have data that's useful only in context, content, and quality that can be trusted. And that goes for all businesses across verticals. If you've got content, you need to have that context in order to deliver quality in your business. And every year that people do this, the poor data quality costs organizations on average about $12.9 million a year. This is from Gartner. So there's real world impacts of having poor data in your business. And really, it's this insight gap. It's where do I get my information from? How reliable is that information? Is that information unstructured? We're very used for structured information, but unstructured information still can be a problem for business. Is there social information? And is there that implicit business knowledge in your organization? And that's where the smarter content piece comes into this. This is why we've created this series, is to kind of, we started off with the create, which is why are we creating this smarter content? What formats of the content evolving in? That structured content creation journey that we had with our partner Fonto last time. Today, we're going to be talking about enriching your content, why content alone is, not enough, why the context really is key. Adopting knowledge models to define your content and put it in the context of your business. How Semaphore supports this classification, entity identification and fact extraction, and the need for that metadata strategy that goes along with that. And then we're gonna show you some smarter content use cases. Like I say, we're joined by Canadian Press today, and we're looking forward to their talk. And then finally in September, we're going to talk about next generational applications, including looking at smarter content to power trustworthy generative AI applications in an ethical manner. If you wanted to ask any questions today, there's the panel on your right-hand side of your screen. Just raise your hand there, and we'll come to those questions at the end. But without further ado, let me introduce Philip DeLorme, who is going to be talking to you now about unlocking the valuable content by adding semantic knowledge.
Thanks, Philip. What is smarter content, and how do we come about it? Smarter content is the process of taking unstructured text and layering on top an additional layer of metadata to add the context and understanding that is necessary. And it allows you to gain the much needed insights and wisdom by making your information context aware, as displayed in these diagrams, going from siloed data through information, knowledge, insight, and wisdom. Those connections between those separate pieces of information. So the journey for getting to smarter content starts with creating those ontologies or entities, lists of terms, vocabularies that will define your content, using classification, entity extraction, and facts extraction to understand and layer on top that metadata that is necessary, and also using semantics, the power of semantics, to build that knowledge graph. You put all of these pieces together, and with that, you've got a journey that will get you to a semantic relationship. And with all that, you'll be building a journey that will get you to smarter content through the associated metadata and semantic relationships to power your new applications. So what does that look like? Semantic knowledge models are one representation that represent the linking of enterprise data together. You can automatically generate different views of heterogeneous and initially unconnected data sources in order to bring them all together. That global view might have some value to it, but really it's in the individual pieces of information that are connected together that drive that user experience. A semantic knowledge graph mirrors real-world relationships and contexts. They provide both, at the same time, rich data contextualization, enhanced data integration, improved data discoverability and accessibility. But there are many advantages that we'll highlight today. One of the key things that we can all count on is that change always happens. And in that change, we need to evolve and adapt to that change. So the ability to collaborate, the ability to adapt to that change is very important. And we want to manage that change or govern that change in the most efficient and user-friendly way in order to kind of adapt to many things that change. And nothing changes more frequently than the news. Now, a little bit on the role of metadata. Metadata in itself is information that describes various different facets of information assets and improves their usability throughout its life cycle. If you turn metadata into an information asset, generally speaking, the more valuable the information asset, the more critical it is to manage that metadata about it, because the metadata defines that understanding that unlocks the value of the underlying data. To put it another way, metadata is very valuable, and metadata encodes what we know about the data. Now, we're pretty familiar with the types of metadata on the right side, but really great metadata provides context about that data. And forward-thinking data strategies must have metadata to surface the critical information and make that data both valuable, useful, secure, and trusted. And we're all about that. This is just one example of using knowledge graphs in order to drive better, more intuitive user interactions. In this example, the person is searching, or the user is searching for presidential elections. But presidential elections is a limited concept, a concept that is linked to multiple different other concepts. Those other concepts each have pieces of data that might be assigned to them. Those pieces of data will enrich the overall user experience for the user, guiding them to pieces of information that they didn't know that they should be searching for, or browsing additional pieces of information that they needed to be familiar with. For our Semaphore clients, like the Canadian Press, they've harnessed the power of metadata in a simple-to-use platform that provides both the automation of classification to create that metadata, or entity extraction in order to enrich their knowledge models and the metadata that is captured from their content, and also to harmonize their data from multiple different sources. With that, I now have the privilege of handing it off to Paul Kelly from the Canadian Press, who will demonstrate unified content with auto-classification in a multilingual news organization.
Thank you, Philip. And now I'm going to demonstrate some of the concepts that Philip was showing in his presentation, and how we've put these things into practice at the Canadian Press, particularly with incorporating ontologies and taxonomies, and implementing those via an auto tagger for the news. The Canadian Press is a Canadian news agency established in 1917. Like a lot of national news agencies, it started off as a cooperative amongst members, changing into a for-profit enterprise in 2010. It's been owned by 3 major news groups in Canada, and we produce text, audio, photographs, video, graphic content, in 2 languages, English and French, the 2 official languages of Canada. We're a nationwide organization. And our customers, for the most part, are news organizations with newspapers, physical newspapers and websites, web portals, such as Yahoo and MSN, corporations, government agencies, radio stations, TV, and other media organizations as well. Like every news agency, like any business in the news organization, we've faced a lot of changes, a lot of disruption over the past 10 to 20 years. It just is ongoing. It requires a response by these organizations to stay abreast of new technologies, to be ready for the constant changes that are taking place in the technological landscape, and to adapt both in the technical sense and organizationally, to have the agility to respond to these changes and to discover and practically rediscover your business model at various times. In CP's case, that has meant mostly a lot of activity over the past 5 or 6 years. We've installed a new content management system, CMS, a new digital asset management system, and those are now installed and established as part of our business. And currently, it just never stops. The installation or the incorporation and integration of a knowledge management system, that would be Progress Semaphore, that I'll be talking about in this demonstration, and our content delivery system, CDS, which, and these 2 things go hand in hand, and I think you'll see why in my demonstration. But having good metadata means that you can get the story, the product out there to the right customer, so that it doesn't get lost, it gets searched, and also to create new products and better products for your customers. Now, the knowledge management challenge at CP is it takes the shape here that I'm highlighting here in this slide. And really the main issue is that we knew that we needed knowledge management, period. And we needed to move, for example, to use a saying I've heard in these seminars and elsewhere, from strings to things. I'll be demonstrating a product that's based on just the strings of text and headlines and slugs and in the body of content. And that's obviously unreliable. We need to move where we have a sense of concepts that are the topics of stories, and how those concepts relate to other concepts, and how these are relevant to the business and the kind of products that we can deliver. We need to manage our taxonomies in both languages. Previously, we had a set of keywords for news that were in English and French that weren't necessarily related to each other, without any IDs that say, here's a French label, here's an English label. We had different siloed, controlled vocabularies for news, for photos, and in other parts of the business. We needed to move towards standardization in order to achieve these goals. We needed a taxonomy of news classification. We chose the IPTC media topics, and a format for representing news, and we chose the IPTC's NIN.js, which is a JSON standard based on the XML NewsML standard. We choose open industry standards because we're too small to create our own taxonomies, full taxonomies, or formats. We can't go bespoke. We can take it off the shelf and get mostly what we want and adapt from there. And throughout all this process, there's just been the dawning realization of the value of metadata at the Canadian press. And the key to that, if you think of the content management system as the heart of a news operation or any content organization, the key to that is integration with the CMS, with an auto tagger. And so auto tagging delivers a number of benefits. It's easier for the writers. provides more consistent tagging of stories. So a story that is about business results or sports results or something like that, a writer in Vancouver might tag it differently. They might have a whole different style of tagging than a writer in Montreal. It varied enormously from journalist to journalist. With the auto tagger, we should be able to tag our stories more consistently and also with no sacrifice in precision. We can expand our tagging. Previously, we were tagging only for topic and a very limited set of topics. Now we are tagging people, places, events, and organizations, so it's much richer. And as I said, it's integrated with the CMS, with our downstream delivery processes, both new and legacy. The legacy ones are probably the biggest challenge. And then establishing, and then sort of in this sort of general topic integration here at the end. It's not just technical integration. There's also internal organizational integration in the form of established governance practices for what vocabularies do we use? How do we modify them? When do we say, no, we're not going to use that tag, or that's not a good tag, or yes, thank you for the suggestion. The set of established practices, it's not just a technical solution, it's an organizational solution as well. So to illustrate all the sort of concepts and ideas that I've just spoken of in those bare text slides, here's an example of how we used to tag a story on the topic of marijuana. It became an important topic in the news in the past few years as it was legalized in various provinces across the country. There were a lot of business stories related to it, a lot of social stories related to marijuana. And you can see how in this old system, there are a lot of terms associated with this topic and looking for their occurrence in headlines, in slug line. A slug line, by the way, I mentioned slug before. It's just a little story ID that kind of persists through the day. So Biden-Trump debate is somebody will write the first story on that. They'll establish the slug and it'll persist. So it's kind of like a keyword story identifier, but it's not a controlled vocabulary. It's a free text thing that journalists do. And it's one of the more challenging aspects of knowledge management and taxonomy management in a news organization. But as you see here, even content, like looking for things like the presence of hashish and cannabis in the content of a story. So we need to move away from this because, as you know, there's many words we could add here. This definition of the product or a tag in the product can become unwieldy. You'd sort of lose track of how things are being defined. It's routing stories according to these rules, and we needed to get some control on it. So basically everything you're seeing here could be solved with one single concept tag applied to the story. And for that, we go to Semaphore and concept management and tag management. Before we do that, I'm going to show you how the auto tagger works and how we're tagging stories these days. This is our CMS. It's called SuperDesk. It's an open source news CMS built by a company called Source Fabric that are based in the Czech Republic. It's used by a number of news organizations in Belgium, Australia, here and in other countries as well. And it's a built for purpose news organization CMS, and it's in daily operation at our news organization, churning out stories that we're sending out to our customers. I've got here a story on a company called Cenovus, which is in the oil and gas sector of Canada, based in Alberta. And I'm going to auto tag it for you. Now, previous to this, actually, I'll just show you how journalists used to work. They would use a field here, index, and they would get a hierarchical set of tags that they could dig through until they found the one that they wanted. And I think it's in here, in energy and resource, oil and gas, and I will just stick with oil and gas there. choose category there. So it's all handpicked by the writer, and mostly inconsistent from writer to writer and of varying degrees of granularity. We have now built and integrated an auto tagger with Semaphore in the background. It consults the Semaphore APIs to help us to auto tag stories, search for tags, and suggest new tags. And I'll demonstrate this right now by running it against this story. You can see right away that it recognizes that this is an oil and gas story. You can see this is at the bottom. If you look at the subjects, this is from an industry standard, the industry standard media topics from the IPTC that I was talking about. The topics are arranged hierarchically. It's a taxonomy. So the main topic for business, which is very important because sometimes we have products that are just business. And so it can relate this lower, more granular, lower in the hierarchy, more granular tag to that main topic. We've also got relevant places that the story is about. It's identified the CEO of the company. And also it has identified 2 organizations that are associated with it. So it's a earnings report from the CEO of Cenovus in the oil and gas sector. So the first thing what I want to do is, because this is an earnings report, so I want to search and add a tag to it to identify it as a standard report on quarterly earnings. And I add it, and you can see how it arranges and also fits in nicely into the hierarchy, this new tag that I've added. They share a common ancestor at the top level. In the story, let's pretend I wrote the story. Trans Mountain Corporation is not mentioned by name. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is in passing. I don't really think this is a necessarily good tag. We could tweak the evidence in the background to make sure this tag doesn't appear, but for our purposes, I can demonstrate that I can remove the tag. And I can also add, if I see that there's a person or place or entity in the story that needs to be in there that isn't in there, I can add it. So, somebody, Joe Schmo, the co-CEO of the company, person, and I can add a tag, and there that person now appears next to the CEO. This goes back to Semaphore in what is called a task or a branch of the software, of our knowledge management software, and is there now as a sort of candidate tag that our knowledge management team can look at, evaluate, and decide whether this person is newsworthy enough to go into our main taxonomy. So now I'm satisfied with the tagging of this story. I'm going to save all of them. There they are. And the story is now ready to publish. So I gave you a little tease about what's going on in the background with this. And so I'll now switch over to Semaphore. And we'll look at, for example, oil and gas. So here we've pulled in, we've got our taxonomic setup here and ontology of entities, events, organizations, people, places, which we previously were not tagging our stories with. We've pulled in as an export the IPTC media topics, and the tag in particular that was of most relevance to the story, oil and gas. And you can see now that we've got all these words in both French and English that are related to this, the kind of words you would see in a story. So we now pulled it out of the old system, which I showed you here, and put it into a place where now we can manage these terms, we can expand them, and we can have relationships. Alternative names, we can have topic has organization and Cenovus. There's the company right there. That was the topic of the story related to this oil and gas topic. And if I click on Cenovus, we also see John McKenzie, the person belonging to or has an association with this organization, who's also mentioned in this story. So this is how in a demonstration of story tagging, how we've transformed our whole approach to knowledge at what is essentially, a knowledge organization. We're in the knowledge sector in a certain extent as a news organization. So to return to my slides, what's the future of knowledge management at CP? We've just got started with news, with text news, as I showed you. We want to expand this to photos. We've got text archives of stories going back to the the 80s. And this requires, of course, we want to tag those stories. Obviously, we can't look at each story and push an auto tagger button. We've got to do that automatically. As we refine our model, we'll be in the state where we can say, okay, we're going to run the archives through, but we're going to have a different approach. We're going to have to start using entity extraction, because we're not going to be able to have tags ready for everything that happened in the 80s. And so we'll have to think of a different way of managing that, but it would be a boon to this organization to have all our archives properly tagged and classified. Events, we've got events feeds, news of events, conventions, and that this is part of our media monitoring service that we hand to corporations. So we want to relate news to events, to photos, and so we're going to be classifying these events and pulling them into the same controlled taxonomic and ontological structures that we've established in Semaphore. And also the fact that we can create new products and new revenue streams by exploiting metadata to its fullest. So that's it for how CP is optimizing for metadata. And now I'm going to throw it to Drew Wenchowski at Progress, and who's going to demonstrate the use of the IPT standards, some of which I mentioned in my presentation, in Semaphore.
Thanks, Paul, for that awesome demo. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little more about semantic publishing, specifically in the news and media verticals. Just to set some ground, we're going to use two IPTC standards for this demo. And the IPTC is a group of industry professionals that define interoperability standards in news and media. We're going to be looking at news in JSON. That's a packaging format for news to be transferred over the wire. And we're also going to be looking at media topics. And the media topics is a set of categories that can be used to classify content for things like distribution or better discovery. So when you speak to large publishers, they often have a couple of problems. And these problems resonate when they have multiple content production systems, external parties that they get content from, editorial archives where they hold data. And there's a lot of disparate data sets and silos when you come into these organizations. This makes it very difficult and can lead to losses of opportunity and potentially revenue. With the Progress Data Platform, we can integrate this data, connect it all up, and make it available in your downstream applications. In this particular demo, we're going to use these IPTC standards to take data in from various editorial systems, normalize that content into the news in JSON format, and then auto-classify the content using Semaphore, specifically with the media topics is the knowledge model. So there are a lot of benefits in semantic publishing. So you can enhance your content for better discoverability. There's potential cost savings when you can reuse content and repurpose it. You can also target more relevant ads to your customers when they're consuming data. You can personalize user experiences. You can optimize your syndication platforms. And you can also increase editorial staff satisfaction by limiting the amount of interactions that they need to do with the systems. So what do organizations do? They're looking for an agile metadata strategy. They want to manage complex data across their ecosystem. They want a sustainable approach from architecture as well as organizing teams. They want to align with their business priorities to ensure that they are hitting their main KPIs. And they want to enable their organizations to iterate and refine their knowledge of their particular business domain, and continuously feedback information from their subject matter experts into the systems. So we want to feed the right content to the right people at the right time. And this really allows organizations to thrive and your customers to be really happy. So I'm going to jump into the demo now and show you how we can bring in this content and auto-classify it. We're looking at the MarkLogic Data Hub Central right now, where we can load in various sources of content, where we can model the data in a format that we want to standardize on, tooling that we can curate the data to make sure it fits that packaging, and then explore content to understand if we complete these tasks in the right way. So loading content, we can load all different kinds of content, whether they're binaries like images. We can load data in various formats. In this case, I'm bringing in news from Wikinews and one other publisher in JSON format. So we're going to take a quick look at our modeling screen, and this is where the IPTC standards start to come in. Data Hub allows you to flexibly define your containers for your metadata, as well as your information. And what we're doing here is we're defining an article. And in this model, we're defining the individual properties, we're giving them names, types, as well as structure. And what we're following here is actually the schema definition from the IPTC news in JSON format. And so when the content is actually curated into this model, it will be stored in that JSON format. So we have things like the URI for identifiers, things like headlines and bodies of text, as well as subjects. And these subjects here we'll see a little bit more in a short bit of time. So that data that we loaded in earlier, we can now start to curate that. We have our article definition with all our properties here, as well as the raw as-is data. We can map those fields over. We can apply cleanup functions to the data, as well as test our harmonization out. So once we harmonize this content, it can now be used for consumption. But you can see here, this data didn't come over with a good set of categorizations. It has some general categorizations, but we want to use what an industry standard is defined by the IPTC and make the content interoperable with other organizations. So in Semaphore, we are now looking at the Knowledge Model Manager, and we have the IPTC media topics loaded in. Looking through the media topics, we have some high-level content media topics here that drive further refine. So we're going to take a look at politics. We can see we have things like elections and government policy. We can specify metadata along with the terms themselves. So we can see here a listing of the media topics in the Knowledge Model Manager. And we can associate various pieces of metadata with the terms. We can associate broader and narrower concepts. And all this is actually being pre-populated in the system using the IPTC media topic standard. This standard is published by the IPTC in SCOS format. And since it's in a SCOS format natively, we can load that directly into Semaphore with minimal effort. So what do you do with these media topics after they are defined in the system and enhanced with metadata? Well, we can publish these topics out and these core concepts, and we can use those in content classification. I took a body of text regarding a election here from our corpus of data. And as we ran it through the classification, we can see the key topics that were identified by this semantic classification engine in Semaphore. We can see things like voting and constitutional law, referendas, and treaties. As we look through the data, there are bits of information in here that point to these topics. And we could also see that it does not have to be a like for like match. We can have things like stemming and lemmatization of terms. We can have other facts and supporting information within the article that will influence this classification strategy. We can also do a semantic analysis of the content and look at the parts of speech and things like named entity recognition to pull things out, like locations and organizations, nationality, people, places, and things typically. This allows for an additional feedback loop or additional metadata in your corpus of data for better search and discoverability. The next thing we're going to look at is actually what can you do with this interconnected data? And what we're seeing here is a demo user interface that's built out on top of these progress tools. We can aggregate content within our corpus, specifically here using those media topics as the subjects. We can build an interconnected knowledge graph of information that is multimodal in nature. So we have both the taxonomy and knowledge model that's defined in the media topics supplied by the IPTC. But as we drill down, we can actually see the content too. So we have the JSON records produced by the harmonization. And we can see each of these articles that have been classified with the media topics in mind. So there's quite a bit of information here that you can gather from harmonizing your content and enriching it with semantic metadata. Think about creating new packages of information for better content distribution based off of these semantic tags. Think about supplying targeted advertisement around a particular tag. There's a whole slew of activities that you can do now with this additional metadata. Thank you. Phil, back to you to conclude the session.